hope you have been enjoying the scintillating performance by Mr. Faiz Mohammed and team. Faiz Mohammed is one of the popular musicians, music composer and violinist. His fusion band performs covers of popular Indian songs. They have performed musical shows in India and abroad. Please give them a round of applause.
Before you get to listen to some more music from Mr. Faiz Mohammed and team, I have a few announcements. I request you all to please make a note of these announcements. First and foremost, please be seated in the auditorium by 10:15 a.m. Please be seated by 10:15 a.m. We will start at 10:30 sharp. On account of Independence Day celebrations, all of you have been provided with a badge of the Indian flag. I request you all to have those badges pinned on. Like the cardinal says, Har Har Tiranga. We at Geojit believe that Har Dil Mein Bhi Tiranga. Please be very careful with your badges. Do not throw them away. Keep it safe. The next one is, in case of medical emergency, we have a medical response team on standby. You can reach out to our volunteers. They are all around the auditorium. These people are dressed in red t-shirts, so you can spot them easily. And they have it written over there that they are part of the medical response team, and they will assist you immediately. I repeat, case of medical emergency, you can reach out to our volunteers who are part of the medical response team, and they're all around the auditorium in red colored t-shirts. The next announcement is about lunch. Lunch break is between 12 and 1:30. Couple of things to make note. We've given you colored bands. You have a green band and an orange band like this. It is only to help us manage the crowd over here. Okay? So once I make an announcement, only then will the people with the green band leave to have lunch first. The people with the green band will leave to have lunch first after I make an announcement. So you have 45 minutes. Please have your lunch quickly and come back. After that, the people with the orange band, that's the head office team, will go and have lunch. Okay? And the HO team, please be back by 1:20. I request all of you here to be back by 1:20 because we will start the afternoon session immediately after that. Ladies and gentlemen, I request you all to come into the auditorium and take your seats. We're all set to begin. Thank you everyone. I request you all to kindly take your seats.
While we are celebrating the 35th anniversary, I have to make a sad announcement. That is about the passing away of Rakesh Chindu. he used to be a source of inspiration and support to Geojit all throughout from 2005 when he became shareholder. So he continues to be a significant shareholder in the company, never sold a share. And he was on the board of Geojit for 12 years. And today morning we also lost a colleague in Delhi office. So in their memory we should stand up for 1 minute for a silent prayer. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us continue with our 35th anniversary celebrations. Crossing a milestone is not about achieving a goal. It is instead looking ahead, a means to evolve, a way to continuously work towards becoming better. It's a never-ending journey. Honorable Chief Guest, distinguished guests, and my dear colleagues, I am Jyoti Radhakrishnan, and with my co-anchor Nitila Nair, I would like to welcome you all to Geojit's 35th anniversary event. For all of us, achievements, big or small, are precious and timeless. And what better way to celebrate than in the company of so many dignitaries, well-wishers, friends, and colleagues.
35 years in the Indian capital market, pioneers in online and mobile trading, successful presence across India and Gulf Cooperation Council, and over 12 lakh customers. The Geojit story that began in 1987 from a small office in Kochi has evolved into becoming one of India's leading investment services companies. It is a tale of vision, dedication, and hard work. As we celebrate our choral anniversary, let us take a few moments to watch the story of Geojit.
In 1987, when I had the opportunity to start Geojit, we, along with my colleagues, started a discussion on what should be our path and what is the final purpose of existence of this organization. This was a situation when the stockbroking industry and the capital market industry were going through significant challenges. The broking industry was basically tuned towards creation of wealth for brokers, and the brokers were mostly managing their own money as the first priority, and the customers were perhaps the second priority. We in Geojit will not entertain any proprietary business. We will only focus on our customers, and we will focus on the long-term wealth creation. This purpose of existence that was laid down in 1987 continues to be as relevant as ever before.
Over the years, Geojit has evolved and now has subsidiaries, joint ventures and associates, making a significant mark in the financial services industry.
We serve our clients through three different channels. One is online, where primarily the trading volume happens. The second is offline, where we use the branch support and the employees to do long-term delivery. And the third, customer care center, where we can call up and take any of our deliveries. But we feel digital is the way going forward, where delivery-based plans will be able to use the services of our branches and the employees in those locations for building wealth for the long term. We have all the products of the instruments, whether it is financial planning, whether it is asset allocation, whether it is investment in different kinds of instruments. If you are interested in equities, we have direct equities, that is you can buy and sell in the secondary market. We have investment in mutual funds, we have portfolio management scheme, as well as smartphones. If you want to invest in debt, we have debt mutual funds, we sell bonds, we sell fixed deposit and other instruments also. Our objective is to become a one-stop shop for all financial needs of our clients, and that is available with us.
We were the first in India to launch online trading, and there began our journey towards investor empowerment. Geojit's clients feel safer knowing that there is always a branch at their disposal for whatever their needs. Our digital platforms are developed to augment this human relationship and not to displace it. Our quest for new technology that benefits customers and our business is insatiable, and our technology platforms are immensely scalable to accommodate new product requirements. Platforms like Flip, Selfie, Smartfolios, FundsGenie, and TraderX are all developed keeping different customer requirements in mind. However, the one common factor is that it aids customers' long-term wealth creation. The very purpose of Geojit's existence is to help customers accumulate long-term wealth.
We work with the noble objective of long-term wealth creation for our customers. Our research is well equipped and well designed to suit the requirement of customers. Our technology platform is well designed to cater all the needs of customer onboarding, transactions and settlement.
With a massive presence of 400 plus branches across India and GCC, Geojit is continuing to grow by leaps and bounds. Geojit is the first Indian broker to establish a presence in the Middle East. We have gained unparalleled insight into the financial needs of non-resident Indians. We now have presence in UAE, Kuwait, Oman and Bahrain.
Geojit is a strong, resilient and sustainable organization. Let me talk about some attributes a strong company would exhibit over the period of its operations. First of all, the company has to be profitable as well as it has to grow. Geojit has grown over the period of more than 10 decades in the capital market industry. The company has grown in balance sheet size and geographically. The company also made consistent profit from the second year of its operation. Geojit is quite agile and adaptable to the change in the business environments. We all know that a lot of new and complex regulations are introduced in the capital market, and many small brokers had to close down or consolidate due to difficulty in adapting them. But Geojit could successfully implement all these regulations, and we are compliant as of the mandate of our regulator. All these financial and non-financial parameters and attributes has helped the organization to become a strong, resilient and a sustainable organization.
For over 35 years, our colleagues of Geojit family has been putting in unrelenting efforts towards service and success. Our employees' ability to quickly learn and adapt to the ever-changing industry requirements and their sheer commitment and dedication towards our beloved clients has been the driving force for delivering us value every day. At Geojit, life is not just about work. It is about attaching oneself to the passion that we follow. It is about the camaraderie between us, the life and the fun and enjoyment that we bring to the table. The very fact that 30% of our employees have been with this organization for 10 plus years highlights the inherent team spirit and the mutual respect amongst us. I am sure as years progress, we would transform and meet any rising challenges continue to help our clients prosper and create wealth.
The Geojit's corporate office in Kochi has been built prioritizing the environmental health, sustainability, and the comfort of the occupants. It is the first Indian Green Building Council LEED India Gold certified building in Cochin Corporation, Kerala. Geojit has always been proactive in its CSR activities and has been relentlessly working to make lives better. All our corporate social responsibility initiatives focus on improving the quality of life of the underprivileged.
The purpose of our existence is to help our customers create long-term wealth. There is one message I always tell to all my colleagues. Please don't take care of Geojit's interest, take care of the legitimate interest of our customers. Customers will take care of our interest. So this is the message I send out to everybody whenever I get an opportunity to meet them and interact with them.
Ladies and gentlemen, was a truly inspiring story. And I'm sure, just like me, all my colleagues out here are extremely proud of the rich legacy that we have and are looking forward to strive and take Geojit to greater heights. I now request our chairman, Mr. Ramanathan Bhupati, our chief guest for the day, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, guest of honor, Sheikh Sultan Sood Al Qasmi, our founder and managing director, Mr. C.J. George, Mr. Mahesh Vyas, independent director, Mr. Radhakrishnan Nair, independent director, Mr. M.P. Vijay Kumar, independent director, Mr. Punus George, non-executive director, Mr. Satish Menon, our executive director, Mr. A. Balakrishnan, executive director, and Mr. Jones George, our executive director, to take their seats on the podium. I request Mr. Satish Menon, executive director, to deliver the welcome address.
Very warm good morning. Not warm. Okay. A little bit hot outside. I'm sure if it doesn't rain today, it will become much more hot outside. And with the programs we are going to see, this will be much more hotter. Nonetheless, it gives me immense pleasure today to welcome all of you to the 35th anniversary celebrations at this wonderful venue. The joy is doubled as we have our esteemed guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament. Mr. Ramanathan Bhupati, our Chairman of the Board of Directors. Sheikh Sultan Sood Al Qasmi, Chairman of Barjeel Geojit Securities. And then I'll start from the directors from the left and I'll leave the executive directors in the last. Mr. Punus George. Mr. Mahesh Vyas. Mr. R.K. Nair. and Mr. Vijay Kumar. Welcome to Mr. George, who needs no introduction, and my colleagues A. Balakrishnan and Jones. No bouquets for you, please. Let me do the customary welcome for all the people here. I will try to speak in the local language. I expect a reply. Let us start from the north of India. कहाँ पे है मनीष? कोलकाता खेमो नाचो Balaji. Central India which requires a little bit more sophistication. और आप लोग कैसे हैं मेरे मध्य भारत के दोस्तों? आवाज कम है. आणि पण इकडे महाराष्ट्र. जय महाराष्ट्र. कसा आहे तुम्ही? Now comes the too difficult part. Andhra Pradesh, Telangana. Where is Tejas? Andar Bagunara. The most difficult is Kannada. So if I make a mistake, it is Shaji's fault, not mine. Namma Karnataka Bandhugale, ನೀವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಹೇಗಿದ್ದೀರಾ? The largest group outside Kerala, that is from Tamil Nadu. Ellarum eppirikinga. Now let us see the strength of Kerala. So you have Kerala North, you have Kerala South, and the head office. I'm going to ask you in Malayalam, of course, how are you? And I expect the reply. So no matter if you are, of course. Okay? Let us see the noise, let us see how this room vibrates. All Kerala. Ellarum Sukumano. Good. So we are celebrating this journey of Geojit from a 5-member team. So I presume this clap was for Kerala, and I hope this clap continues when we do our cultural programs from 2 o'clock onwards. So we are celebrating this journey from a 5-member team in 1987 to this 2,600 odd colleagues we have in this year. It's a proud day for us today. We have travelled far from Jammu and Kashmir also to come to Kochi for this 35th anniversary. It will help us strengthen our bond and create a culture of cooperation for us. I don't want to take too much of your time. So once again, a very warm welcome to each one of you. To begin with the celebration, I invite the dignitaries on the dais to light the lamp.
presidential address will be delivered by Mr. Ramanathan Bhupati, Chairman, Geojit. Mr. Bhupati is a founding partner of Chennai-based chartered account firm R. Bhupati. He has been on the board of Geojit since 2006. Mr. Bhupati also holds the directorship in Geojit Technologies Private Limited and Geojit Lyrics Private Limited. I now request our chairman to deliver the presidential address.
It is indeed a great pleasure to be here with our distinguished guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, MP, Mr. Sheikh Sultan Saud Al Hussain, Chairman of Berlin Geojit, Mr. C.J. George, our board members, guests, and staff, as we celebrate excellence in the capital market industry. India is celebrating its year of independence tomorrow. Our 30th year. I am associated with this company from the year 2007. And let me take a few minutes of your time to narrate to you my experience in this company. The entire investing public, not only the employees, the clients of Geojit, are indeed fortunate to have a company like Geojit. What's quite inspiring for me is that when we are coming from different parts of India, the independent directors are coming from different parts of India, we pick up some item in the newspapers or the business magazines, and when we come for interaction with the board meetings, we ask them very focused, specific questions as to what is happening in our country and the economic situation of our country. That will come a reply from the team, properly chaired and led by Mr. G.J. George. The whole preparedness and the background of the incident, how it happened, what was the cause, what is the precaution to be taken, how is Geojit prepared to meet the challenge. I think all of you, as part of employees of Geojit, are privileged to work in this company, and you have all contributed for the growth of the company. Let me acknowledge this in this 35th year of celebrations. Let me briefly tell you what the history of Geojit, which was aptly demonstrated in the video. When Geojit was established, the capital market was nothing like what it is now. The sector has transformed greatly, and I am proud to say our company led many a change in the industry. The landmark achievement, among the many achievements, the landmark achievement of the company was when it launched online trading for the first time in India in 2000. That's not the end of it. Then again, within a matter of 10 years, we were the first to launch trading through mobiles. This demonstrates how proactive the company is to meet the changing environment and the regulatory requirements. These achievements are even more significant considering that Geojit was a young company established in Kerala, far away from Bombay, the financial capital of India. I am happy to note that now around, maybe it's an interesting fact for all of us to carry home and cherish forever, is 90% of our transactions are done online. We are nearly fully on the digital mode. It was the foresight of the management that helped Geojit become one of the leading investment services companies in India. And as Mr. George normally used to say, at most all meetings he used to say, and he has told it today also on the video, that our company's guiding principle has always been to see to the interests of our clients, and our clients approach Geojit for one reason, which is to help them multiply their wealth. Today, the chairperson, challenges we face might appear different, but the basic needs of people have not changed. Our clients still want us to help them manage their investments, increase their wealth. I am sure that Geojit will find ways to assist and guide investors for years and years to come. Let us step into the future with confidence, as we have rich experience to guide us. But at the same time, with beginner's mind, we will learn, adapt and grow. This is the next celebrations. We may not be part of the celebrations, but definitely our association with Geojit will continue, and we wish Geojit all success in its activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. Around the turn of the century, Geojit decided to spread its wings and expand its services to a large diaspora of non-resident Indians. Geojit joined hands with Barjeel Shares and Bonds to form a joint venture company, Barjeel Geojit Securities LLC. And since then, we have developed a strong bond with Sheikh Sultan Saud Al Qasmi, Chairman, Barjeel Geojit Securities LLC. Sheikh Sultan Saud Al Qasmi is also an Emirati columnist and researcher and founder of the Barjeel Art Foundation. He has taught politics of modern Middle Eastern art at New York University, Yale University, Georgetown University, Boston College, the American University at Paris, and most recently Columbia University. We are truly delighted to have you with us. I now invite guest of honor, Sheikh Sultan Saud Al Qasmi, Chairman, Barjeel Geojit Financial Services, to address the gathering.
Let me start by commending the strong ties that bind India to my country of the UAE. From the first visit of our founding president, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, to India in 1975, which may have been amongst his very first visits because the UAE was only founded shortly before that, all the way to Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's first visit to the UAE in 1981. Relations have continued to strengthen. Only last June, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Abu Dhabi to offer condolences in person on the passing of our Sheikh Khalifa, may God rest his soul. Today, India is the UAE's second largest trading partner, with bilateral trade currently totaling $60 billion. And with the signing of the new comprehensive economic partnership agreement, trade is expected to grow to $100 billion. The UAE also plays host to almost 3.5 million Indians who are contributing greatly to the development of the country in various fields. Many of the members of the Indian community live in Dubai, where Geojit, as was just mentioned, has established 21 years ago a partnership to serve the non-resident Indian community across the UAE under the name of Barjeel Geojit. That's the company that I chair in the UAE. The UAE, which is today amongst the 5 top economies in the region, despite having a much smaller population, is strongly on the path of recovery from the effects of COVID-19. Firstly, the UAE introduced an economic stimulus package worth over $105 billion at the start of the pandemic. Tourism in Dubai, one of the main staples of the economy, levels are approaching pre-pandemic. I think I read that 7 million tourists came in the first half of this year, which is almost equal to the 8 million tourists before the pandemic. Furthermore, due to the elevated price of oil in Abu Dhabi's revenues and the 3.1 million barrels of oil that Abu Dhabi exports daily, the economy is expected to get a major boost, not considering even the gas economy and all the other industries that contribute to the UAE. Thanks to these factors and others, the UAE's central bank says that GDP is expected to grow by 5.4% this year and more than 4% next year. The reason I'm saying this is for you to know that your partnership in the Gulf and in the UAE is hopefully going to be going stronger and stronger. Today, the UAE's economy is the second largest in the Arab world after Saudi Arabia and the 6th in West Asia. If you think of the UAE's population, we are 10 million people versus populations like Iran, Turkey, Egypt approaching 100 million. And yet our economies are equal, if not bigger, than some of these countries. As a sign of the economic strength of the UAE leadership has been invited recently to the G20 meetings. I believe India is a member of that club. Barjeel Geojit is positioned to take advantage of this growth by continuing to offer efficient and trusted services to our clients in Dubai and across the UAE. Once again, congratulations to Geojit, its leadership and team members, as well as the clients and shareholders on this auspicious occasion, and continued success. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, sir. Your warm words of affection for India and Geojit have filled our hearts with positivity and good vibes. I now request Mr. George, Executive Director, Geojit, to introduce our chief guest.
Good morning. I extend a warm welcome to everyone present here on the company's 35th anniversary. It's a big day for everyone who's been a part of the company, present times as well as the past. I'm extremely honored to introduce our chief guest, a scintillating personality, highly skilled diplomat, distinguished parliamentarian, best-selling author, thinker well ahead of his time, a historian of considerable rigor, a speaker par excellence. In short, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, a third-time Member of Parliament for Trivandrum, is the best-selling author of 23 books, both fiction and non-fiction, besides being a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and a former Minister of State for Human Resource Development and for External Affairs in the Government of India. He has won numerous awards, including the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, a Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and the Crosswords Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2019, Dr. Tharoor was also awarded the Sahitya Akademi Award in the category of English non-fiction for his book An Era of Darkness. He chairs Parliament's Standing Committee on Information Technology. Born in London, Dr. Tharoor was educated in India and the United States, completing a PhD at the age of 22 from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at the Tufts University. Dr. Tharoor began his diplomatic career at the United Nations and served as Assistant Secretary and Under-Secretary General. During his 30 years at the UN, Dr. Tharoor focused on improving global peace, refugee rehabilitation, and administration. Most recently, the French government conferred him with the French Legion of Honor, the highest civilian award for his writings and speeches. His impeccable blend of wit, charm, and elegance makes him a globally recognized speaker. We are honored to have you here, sir, and we are looking forward to your keynote address.
Thank you very much for those very generous words. Mr. C.J. George, founder of Geojit's Financial Services, Mr. Ramnathan Bhupati, Chairman, my good friend Sheikh Sultan Saud Al-Qasimi, the multilingual Suresh Menon, the very kind and generous Jones George, Mr. A. Balakrishnan, Executive Directors, all the other distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen, Geojit colleagues and friends. I hope that covers everybody. As we say in Kerala, Ellavarikkum ende Vinidamaya Namaskaram. It really is a pleasure to join you on the memorable occasion of the 35th anniversary of Geojit Financial Services, this Cochin-based investment services company that all of us in Kerala can truly be proud of. In the last 35 years since your inception in the late 1980s, I'm told that your company has grown meteorically and today boasts over 486 offices across India and the GCC, providing services to over 12 lakh customers and managing assets to the tune of rupees 60,000 crores. As an MP from Thiruvananthapuram, I've often bemoaned the paradox of how on one hand this beautiful state of Kerala is heralded as God's own country, and yet on the other hand we seem sometimes to have the unfortunate tag of being the devil's own backyard for business. This reflects the precarious state of our economy and the political and bureaucratic red tapeism, regulatory obstacles, and petty corruption that often hinders the growth of local businesses. Yet the story of Geojit in many ways gives us hope. It's a compelling example of how businesses founded and headquartered in Kerala can, with the right leadership, commitment and approach, allow us to perhaps one day shed this unwelcome tag. My congratulations again to founder C.J. George, the senior leadership and members of Geojit Financial Services for your remarkable growth thus far. I join you in mourning the passing of your former director, Mr. Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, and I wish all of you the very best for the journey ahead. Now, Mr. George had asked me to share with you my thoughts on recent global developments, particularly the backlash against the once much heralded, much praised phenomenon of globalization. I must admit, as someone who spent nearly 3 decades at the United Nations, singing the virtues of globalization and multilateralism, that I'm not so sure of its prospects today. Let us face the discomforting ground realities. We are living in an era where our societies are increasingly becoming fractured, where questions of identity and ideology appear to be driving us farther away from each other, and at a time when there is a vacuum created by the absence of a collaborative brand of leadership worldwide. It started with a global backlash against globalization that took 2 forms, economic and cultural. The economic backlash was straightforward. The poor and the unemployed in the developed world began to feel they had no stake in the globalized system and demanded to know why their government's policies benefited people in faraway lands like China and India with what used to be their jobs. A common expression was that their jobs had been shanghaied. They wanted to reduce the growing inequality in every developed country and go back to the security of older, more familiar economic ways in which each generation assumed they would earn more and live better than their parents did, something which for the first time the current young generation had to stop taking for granted. That was the economic backlash. The cultural backlash derived from the same resentment but expressed itself in a different arena. The political denunciation of global trade led to hostility towards foreigners, good old-fashioned xenophobia, as more and more people sought the comforts of traditional identity and ways of life. Rage was expressed against liberal politics, cosmopolitans and technocrats, trade agreements, immigration, multiculturalism. Animated often by bitter working class and lower middle class resentment of global elites, the masses rejected the entire brew of cosmopolitanism, multiculturalism, and secularism in the name of cultural rootedness, religious or ethnic identity, and nationalist authenticity. Some of you may remember the former British Prime Minister Theresa May saying that if you think you're a citizen of the world, you haven't understood the first thing about what citizenship really means. In fact, the world was seen by many as divided in David Goodhart's famous formulation between the somewheres and the anywheres. The anywheres being people who are comfortable anywhere on the planet, flit from business class lounge to five-star hotel and join international gatherings, whereas the somewheres are rooted in one place, immersed in one religious culture, speak one language, and share one ethnicity. Political leaders were quick to seize the opportunity to tap into both kinds of backlash against globalization. Populist leaders like Donald Trump, who rose to the presidency of the United States on slogans of America First and Make America Great Again, and a host of others, from Mr. Bolsonaro of Brazil and Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Turkey to Viktor Orban in Hungary and even Narendra Modi of India, successfully persuaded their voters that they were more authentic embodiments of their nations than the allegedly ruthless secular cosmopolitans they sought to displace. Others have been rising, from the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany and the Freedom Party in Austria, to the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands and Marine Le Pen and Éric Zemmour in France, none of whom have won national elections, but who've all come close enough to shift the national discourse. Together, such parties and leaders, combining nationalist fervour with a determined articulation of popular prejudices, have made nationalism the default model of national self-definition. And should we now, after Ukraine, anoint President Putin as the chairman of an oxymoronic nationalist international? Of course, these leaders were challenged by liberal intellectuals who lamented their defiance of the recent consensus that the world was moving inevitably towards greater integration, where borders were becoming less relevant and sovereignty could be pooled for the benefit of humanity as a whole. But the emotional appeal of nationalism to most voters put the liberal cosmopolitans on the defensive. If these were trends that preceded the pandemic, they have accelerated over the last 2 years of COVID, with borders becoming more rigid, communities further marginalized, and the notion of us versus them attaining primary importance. Consequently, it seems that COVID-19 has inaugurated an era of deglobalization, with the world embracing isolationism and protectionism more enthusiastically than prior to the outbreak. The COVID pandemic confirmed for many that in times of crisis, people rely on their governments to shield them, that global supply chains are vulnerable to disruption and are therefore unsustainable, that dependence on foreign countries for essential goods, such as pharmaceuticals or even the ingredients that go into making them, could be fatal. I remember America realizing with horror in January of 2020 that their favorite remedy for headaches, ibuprofen, was 100% imported from China. And as you remember, for some weeks, exports from China were suddenly halted. And the Americans said, what do? We get a headache. Nations tried aggressively to acquire medicines, supplies, and vaccines for their own people at the expense of each other. There was a rush to reset global supply chains and raise trade barriers. The demand arose for more protectionism and self-reliance, for bringing manufacturing and production value chains back home, or at least closer to home. These conversations found fresh impetus following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which forced all of our countries to grapple with difficult questions, from the limitations on state sovereignty, the credibility of the United Nations Charter, new disruptions of supply chains and trade, not only on commodities, all the way to issues like energy interdependence and the future of warfare itself. While the consequences of Ukraine are still playing themselves out and COVID restrictions have significantly eased around the world, the pandemic and the resultant lockdowns reminded us that much of what seemed to be knitting the world ever closer together, and which we till recently took for granted, was vulnerable. The world economy has thrived since globalization began in 1980 on an open system of free trade. That had already been shaken by the financial crash of 2008-9 and the American trade war with China. The pandemic has exacerbated these challenges, with estimates suggesting that nearly a third of global trade fell in 2020, although a gradual recovery trajectory has started this year to emerge. But meanwhile, the pressure to decouple from China increased over the last 2 years, even as this year's sanctions on Russia have severely restricted trade, investment, and financial flows into and out of that country. COVID-19 had also convinced many that foreigners are to be feared, that strict border and immigration controls are essential, that countries cannot always expect useful help from their neighbors and even allies, and that national interests should trump international cooperation. Instead, the emphasis is on sovereignty, nationalism, and self-protection. The increasing rejection of dependence on foreign goods is mirrored in a rejection of foreign interference as well. The UN has every reason to worry about its continuing relevance, with its image in the eyes of the public in further decline on account of its perceived inertia in preventing the war or even mitigating the invasion of the sovereign borders of one of its own member states by another, a permanent member of the Security Council. Those of us who began to imagine the globe as one world have had to revise our thinking. Let us take the impact of COVID first. There's no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic, for all the reasons I've already mentioned, was a mega shock to the global system that is likely to disrupt the existing world order. As sovereignties are reasserted around the world, and treaties and trade agreements increasingly questioned, multilateralism, the once taken for granted mantra of international cooperation, could well be the next casualty. It was already in danger of being eroded before the pandemic. Britain withdrawing from the European Union, America leaving the landmark Paris Climate Agreement, President Trump pulling the US out of WHO. Now isolationist voices portray themselves as being vindicated. The World Health Organization's response to the outbreak, with its indulgence of the official Chinese line, points to the waning legitimacy of international institutions. Many of our global institutions and their agencies suffer from politicization, manipulation, and lack of representation and independent leadership. Had global governance been working effectively, the world would have identified the coronavirus as soon as it emerged, sounded a global alarm earlier about its dangers, and identified and publicized the best practices that should have been adopted by all countries to prevent or limit its spread. That this did not happen is a damning indictment of the state of our new world disorder. The same set of trends has another corollary in domestic politics. For many countries, the answer to the dilemmas and disruptions thrown up by the pandemic lies in strong government, in putting the nation's needs over individual citizens' freedoms, and in dispensing with democratic niceties from federalism to parliamentary oversight, in what the government deems to be the national interest. Support for nationalist strongmen, many of whom have used the present crisis to shore up their authority and power, may increase exponentially. The phenomenon of deglobalization that I've described has its regional implications too. Europe, once seen as a poster child for the virtues of regional integration, became the epitome of its limitations, since the idea of Europe crumbled quickly under the onslaught of the pandemic. The famous Schengen visa and the notion of border-free movement was the first casualty of COVID-19. The EU countries, even those members of the Schengen arrangement, threw up the barriers at the first sign of the virus. It did not take them long to rediscover the disadvantages and limits of the very free movement of goods, services, capital, and people that they had sworn by for 5 decades. Italy, the first major center of the COVID-19 crisis, was denied medical equipment by its EU neighbors, who introduced export controls instead of extending solidarity to their fellow Europeans in distress. Geopolitically, the era of globalization coincided for the most part with what was dubbed the unipolar moment, a brief period of a couple of decades of dominance, politically, militarily, economically, and technologically, of the world by the United States of America. The era of deglobalization is likely to be marked by a new bipolar tension between the US and its principal competitor for the label of superpower, China. No longer will the US be uncontested in any of these domains. China's so-called peaceful rise, I don't think that's working either, is the sound system. It's back. China's so-called peaceful rise for the last quarter of a century, fueled by American investment in its industries and burgeoning export trade for its manufacturers, has culminated in supplanting the US as a manufacturing and industrial power, rivaling it in economic size and exceeding its surpluses, as well as challenging it in new cutting-edge technologies like 5G. The worry is that a risen China will see no need to remain peaceful. Its belligerence with India on our disputed frontier, its assertiveness with its maritime neighbors like Japan and Vietnam, its tough new security clampdown in Hong Kong, and its trade sanctions on Australia all speak of a newfound willingness to pursue its goals aggressively. The coronavirus, of course, is far from being the first global bug to have bitten us, nor will it be the last. In 2001, we learned that anger and malice in the dusty caves of Afghanistan could take down skyscrapers in New York. The year 2008 saw dormant financial malpractices in the US rapidly metastasize into a global financial crisis. In 2016, Russia tried to register itself on the voter rolls for the US elections, spawning a new and global market for foreign influence operations. Now, in 2022, war and destruction in Ukraine have been added to the ominous mix. Many countries are putting up barriers, frightened and mistrustful of the outside world. Xenophobia and racism are on the rise. Instead of leveraging these institutions to search for shared interests that can make regimes fit for purpose in the 21st century, states are locked into an increasingly destructive zero-sum race. And all of this is happening while democracy itself is imperiled. We see the erosion of democratic stability in 3 forms: a loss of confidence in the democratic process in many countries, institutional issues that have arisen because of the ongoing assault on public institutions, which we've even seen in our own country, and, surprisingly amongst many members of the public in democratic countries, a growing preference for authoritarian alternatives. In a widely discussed paper, a pair of Harvard scholars, Monk and Foer, have argued that the health of liberal democracies across the world is failing, the scientific term being democratic deconsolidation. and that former consolidated democracies around the globe confront imminent degeneration. In the World Values Survey that is taking place every year around the world, there's been a considerable dilution of support for democracy and a growing impatience with the democratic process, especially amongst the so-called millennial generation, those born after the 1980s, that we can no longer assume that once a country upholds democratic institutions for a steady period of time, fosters strong civil society traditions, and attains a degree of wealth, that the future of democracy will be secure in its hands. It is, we are told, a fallacy, and we must always guard against this complacency. Conversely, the same data suggests that the support for non-democratic or authoritarian models of governance is rising in many countries. In the United States, for instance, the share of people who argue that military rule would be either good or very good rose in the last 3 decades from 1 in 16 to 1 in 6. Similarly, the share of people who believed in the benefits of strong leader who need not bother with the inflictions of parliament or elections rose from 24% of respondents across the world to 32%. Though their paper deals principally with the United States, these Harvard scholars have argued that similar sentiments are brewing elsewhere. And in our own country, a recent CSDS Azim Premji University study has said that over 50% of respondents in 4 large states of our country expressed a preference for an authoritarian alternative to our existing democracy. Yet, having said all this, having painted a grim picture of an increasingly fearful world, an increasingly nationalist set of governments which are less democratic in their orientation, yet I would still argue that the sheer complexity and immeasurability of our interdependence requires more and better global governance, not less. Turning our backs on multilateral institutions at the first sign of weakness is unfortunate. I spent 29 years working at the United Nations, and I can say with confidence that the key lesson it taught me is that the world is a better place when countries engage in dialogue, when they have a forum to talk through the problems they share, rather than resorting to tit-for-tat responses on issues they disagree on. In the post-COVID world, unfortunately, countries are turning their backs on such forums in their desire to reduce their exposure to external dangers. External forces do not only represent threats, they also offer opportunities that visionary leaders should seize. What does that mean? To my mind, even as our society becomes more insular, stratified, and hostile, there now arises a unique opportunity for talented leaders, like many of you in the audience today, to rise to the occasion and address the acute leadership deficiency that the world is currently facing. The New World Order will need a set of leaders to bring us back together. Individuals who, though rooted in their immediate localities, are capable of displaying the necessary vision and aptitude to think beyond their immediate borders, who can revive and champion the idea that we as a human community are stronger when we are together. The new leaders that the world desperately needs will be individuals courageous enough to think beyond their immediate interests and the allure of a bottom line, and instead will work actively to identify the complex challenges faced by our society and produce innovative ways to successfully address these challenges. Listening to Mr. George saying that the bottom line was less important than the interests of the customers, the clients of the company, that is the kind of message that the rest of the world can also learn from. These new leaders should work together to bring us together again, especially those who have till now fallen under the categories of the marginalized, the discriminated, the financially vulnerable, and the socially chastised. These leaders, therefore, will not just be managers, but indeed problem solvers and change makers. This is where each of you comes in, because it's a challenge for all of you. You must be more than managers. You must be more than client representatives. You must be proactively change makers yourselves. What are the qualities of leadership you will need to assume these responsibilities? A capacity for innovation, a willingness to work for the welfare of those around you, the courage to offer a brand of leadership that is anchored in empathy. And where there is discontent, whether in the public as far as a political leader is concerned, or in the office as far as a corporate leader is concerned, it is our responsibility to understand what provokes that discontent and to find long-term answers that benefit the maximum number of people. Together, for instance, we must now move beyond narrow concerns of national security, which is essentially freedom from terror and attack, to a broader vision of human security, freedom from hunger and hopelessness. Of a world where everyone has food, clothing, shelter, where democracy reigns, where people's creative and entrepreneurial energies are freed, where human rights are upheld and the environment is protected. Leaders like you must join hands with leaders in parliament, in civil society, in education, in journalism, and more. This is a world in which all of us are involved, and all of us can contribute to reversing the trends that I described in the first two-thirds of my speech. The only hope for the future, I believe, lies in international solidarity. The rapid and global spread of the coronavirus epidemic is a devastating reminder of the consequences of disorder. It is also a timely memorandum to sovereign states that the reassertion of sovereignty must not imply an abandonment of global responsibilities. When the current pandemic is fully and truly over, even though I don't see too many masks here today, there are still some, the globe must learn lessons about what happened and how international systems and institutions can be strengthened and radically reformed in order to forestall its recurrence. The same can be said about the ongoing Ukraine war and sanctions. Instead of strengthening the capacity of our global institutions to cope with a future crisis, the world's reaction to the virus and the war may well end up destroying the most fundamental feature COVID-19 has exposed, the idea of our common humanity. We must not allow that to happen. We must learn to live and work together again. With those words, I'd like to thank you all for your attention and wish Geojit once again a very happy 35th birthday. Have a wonderful conference. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Tarun. Well, it's indeed a very rare opportunity that most of us over here present get to interact with you. So when we told them that you were willing to interact with them after your speech, they were more than excited for it. So I hope you're willing to take the questions. The first question for you is from Dr. V.K. Vijay Kumar. He's a Chief Investment Strategist at Geojit.
At the outset, a big thank you, Dr. Tarun, for that great speech as always. My question is regarding the economic dimension of your speech. I agree with the political and cultural backlash that you referred to. I belong to the camp that believes that what is happening now is not deglobalization, but a slowing down of the process of globalization, which can be more appropriately described as sloganization. Globalization slowing down. And of course, I agree with you that the trend has slowed down from 1980s to 2008. It has been on a fast forward mode, and since then it has been coming down. But then latest data regarding trade and capital flows do not suggest that there is deglobalization. It's actually slowing down. And even if it happened, to give you just one example, last year India's IT exports have exceeded the crude oil exports of Saudi Arabia. So it is happening very fast. And our pharmaceutical exports, you already referred to that. And even if trade slows down, India will be, this is one opinion on which I want your response, India will be one of the few countries which will be least impacted by this globalization, because we are not a trade dependent country like China or Brazil or Australia. So India will be least impacted even if the outcome is very bad. How do you respond?
Well, there are a lot of ideas there. Let me respond to a couple of them. I think the distinction between deglobalization and slowing globalization is, I'm afraid, only a distinction of degree. They're not two unrelated phenomena. It's the same phenomena. In fact, there was, as I said, a 33% drop in global trade in 2020. And inevitably a slow recovery was possible. But today's numbers are still very much lower than 2019's, and 2019 did not show the kind of acceleration from 2009 that you would have liked to have seen. So for these reasons, we are in a situation where the broad trends I've outlined have not, sadly, been transformed. And if anything, the sanctions that have occurred offer a fresh piece of evidence, because now you're seeing the fracture of the global trading system. Russia is now out of that system, and Russia is trading with a few select countries, China being the most obvious one, to some degree, at least as far as oil and some ruble-rupee trade is concerned, with us as well, and with a handful of neighbors. But for the rest of the world, Russia has become anathema, and even European partners are gradually cutting down further. So instead of a global economy, we might end up with a fractured system in which different parts of the world trade only with each other. That, to my mind, is the classic epitome of deglobalization. Now, when it comes to India, you may be right, but don't forget that our trend was going the other way. You know, in 2008-9, I think China had about a 78% dependence on exports for its GDP growth, whereas India had about 15%. I'm not swearing by the exact figures, but there was that kind of contrast. Today, our GDP growth owes a much larger percentage to trade. Of course, I'm including trade in services as well as trade in goods, but it's certainly well above 28 or 30%. And that means that our dependence on global forces has been increasing, precisely at a time when global forces are in retreat. So I wouldn't be entirely complacent. I, for example, was one of the few, I think, in the political space, advocates of us signing up with RCEP. But as you can see, in our politics, we still tend to act on the basis of our fears rather than our aspirations. So we too are contributing to a desire to step back from the potential of global trade. Now, of course, the counter argument that will be made by the government is that they're going to increase their bilateral trade agreements. We are now making a serious attempt to conclude an agreement with the British, which for many years had proved elusive. Let's see if that helps. But it's still not an answer to the globalization argument, where we would have been lowering barriers with everyone and trading with larger and larger circles of partners. Bilateral trade is something that existed before the globalization era as well, right? So that's why I would say that I would still stand by my analysis, even though you can certainly point to the fact that there has been some recovery since the setback of 2020, a very slow gradual recovery in 21 and 22. I'm not sure that the overall broader trends that I've identified are going to disappear overnight. And certainly as things continue with the Ukraine war and the Russian sanctions, some may actually get worse before they get better.
The next question will be from Nitin K, who's from the head office at Kochi.
Okay.
Nitin K.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself Nitin. I am handling client grievances in head office. This is my great opportunity to ask a question to you, a world personality. This may be a simple question, sir.
Okay.
My question is regarding the recent issues going on in our neighboring country Sri Lanka, and the people, they are suffering. And many experts say that the Sri Lanka's experience should be a lesson for Kerala. From my question is Kerala's point of view. Should we learn anything from the Sri Lankan crisis, as we are a consumer state rather than a productive state? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, Sri Lanka, as you know, went through and is going through a terrible crisis, which many would argue was of its own making, compounded by both the phenomena that I described in my speech, the impact of the COVID pandemic, and now the sanctions on Russia. What was the impact? Well, first of all, Sri Lanka had been somewhat irresponsible in its economic management. It had done 2 or 3 major blunders. It dramatically reduced its own revenue base by slashing taxes on the affluent in Sri Lanka, while borrowing hand over fist from various international lenders, including China. In fact, the Chinese loans had already become unsustainable before the pandemic when, for example, the Sri Lankans had to hand over the port of Hambantota, built by the Chinese, to China on a 99-year lease because of their inability to service the debt incurred to build that port. So there was already a very serious debt crisis building up in Sri Lanka. The pandemic dealt them a very serious blow because they were overwhelmingly dependent on revenues from tourism. And as we all know, as Kerala also knows, the first victim of COVID pandemic was tourist travel. And when tourism collapsed, Sri Lanka lost a disproportionate share of its economic resources. They also made other mistakes. For example, because the government couldn't afford to import urea and fertilizers from abroad, they suddenly announced 100% switch to organic farming and banned all fertilizer products. This had 2 negative impacts. Sri Lanka suddenly was unable to produce enough food because organic farming has lower productivity than fertilizer-based farming. So they were no longer able to produce enough food to feed themselves. And their other principal export, which is tea, the tea harvest also suffered terribly. So that again created a major problem. So they had a perfect storm, as it would be called, where revenues collapsed, export earnings collapsed, and debt was super high. And that's why they suddenly ended up being completely unable to cope. And the result was all that you've seen: mile-long queues, complete shortage of petrol, inability to import petrol, inability to import enough food to feed people. It was a national catastrophe, by far the worst seen in the world as a result of these trends that I've described to you. And then when, of course, the Russian sanctions occurred, the price of oil skyrocketed even further. A country already broke, which was perhaps at the old price able to import some oil, was not able to import oil at the new price, and petrol and so on, and the country just ground to a halt. Even their airlines had to refuel in Thiruvananthapuram rather than being able to go to Colombo and get fuel at the airport because there wasn't any. That was how bad the situation was. Now, Sri Lanka therefore is a pretty unique case, but it points to the obvious dangers that other countries can learn from, that you cannot afford to be overly dependent on one source of revenue that may be vulnerable to a global pandemic or other global forces. You cannot take actions that seriously undermine whatever export potentials you have, and you should not be allowing yourself to get over-indebted. Those are national lessons. Kerala has serious problems as an economy, and some of these seem similar to Sri Lanka, but it is not a nation, it is a state, and therefore it is part of a much larger picture. Now, what were Kerala's similarities to Sri Lanka? We too suffered terribly because our tourism industry generates about 25% of our state's GDP, and that suddenly disappeared during the COVID pandemic, and it still has not fully come back. So that's certainly one major problem that Kerala had. But 2 other major sources of revenue for the state. One was alcohol consumption that actually went up. So the excise from alcohol
continue to fuel the government. And the second was remittances from abroad, which did go down a bit because during the lockdown, even some of our NRK workers lost their jobs and reduced their incomes. But it only went down by a certain percentage, and some of that went up again later, so that wasn't a body blow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Ms. Praveena K. She's from Bangalore.
Good afternoon, Dr. Karul.
Hello. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's regarding when we are talking about deglobalization. What do you think the acceptance from the young generation? Why? Because even though we have such a strength indigenously, but more and more people have more acceptance to the international standards. So how do you think that with this kind of international acceptance, we can still achieve this deglobalization kind of an idea?
I'm sorry, I didn't clearly hear you. The acoustics in this chamber are a bit challenging. What was the phrase, the word you used? What do I think of?
Sorry, sir?
You said apart from deglobalization, what do I think of?
There is more acceptance to the international standards amongst our young generation.
Oh, yes.
So how do you think that we can still achieve this deglobalization idea?
There is a greater acceptance, as you rightly say, of international standards, and there is also a level of aspiration fueled by exposure to international experiences, which more and more Indians have now. Satellite television brings us life in other countries. The relative ease of travel, though of course the last 2.5 years have restricted that severely, but nonetheless, travel before that and the resumption of travel will also expose us to what's going on in the rest of the world, and we will ask ourselves, why shouldn't we in India enjoy what these people we have seen elsewhere are enjoying? So all of that is absolutely right. There is no doubt about it, an exposure to and a consciousness of the best the world can offer, and there is a desire and an aspiration to attain that for ourselves, particularly among the young. I don't disagree with you. The phenomena that I described, of course, are global geopolitical and geoeconomic phenomena which go beyond the capacity of any individuals necessarily to solve until we collectively are able to change the political positions of our masters, which we can do if the world were more democratic. That was also the thrust of the last bit of my speech. But having said that, the truth is that having an international consciousness does not guarantee that the political consequences will be globalization. As I mentioned the example of what happened in Europe in 2019, for 50 years the Europeans have been trying to have closer integration. They had essentially eliminated borders between themselves within the Schengen group. And suddenly when COVID came, everyone forgot all of that. And they immediately went in for nationalistic measures, shut the borders even within the Schengen agreement, and in effect suspended or invalidated the Schengen agreement. There was a complete lack of solidarity within the European Union for very many months, while every country was our people for themselves, every government was for our own people and not for everyone else. And I gave the example of how they treated Italy. So, yes, familiarity alone does not guarantee certain political consequences and certain political stands. Familiarity is one thing, politics is another. And let's look at the 20th century. There was frequent travel, tourism, culture and trade in the relations between Britain, France, Germany and other countries in Europe. Didn't stop them going to war with each other. So I have to explain that merely understanding the rest of the world, appreciating international standards, aspiring international goals doesn't guarantee that you're going to necessarily have a more globalized world.
Since we are on a very tight schedule, one more last question.
Sure.
It's from Mr. Romeo Sharma from Delhi.
Where is Ms. Sharma from Delhi?
Right at the middle, sir.
She may not be in the hall. Oh, she's there. I see.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I am Romeo Sharma from Geojit from Delhi. And my question is to you, what are the impacts of deglobalization in the economic system?
That was partly what my speech was about. You don't want me to repeat all of that, do I?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I think that we will have to see how the trends are, and you've heard some pushback from a couple of the questions already. My broad assumption is that we will have very much less global trade than we used to and that we were getting used to in the past, and there will be more restrictions and more limitations, which is what we've seen over the last few years. I think certainly from 2008 to 2021 or 22, I would say the trend has been disastrous in terms of a more integrated global economy. Whether there will be a change, right now we are seeing a small post-COVID revival. And whether we'll go back to a globalized world for the reasons that I described at such length, I doubt very much. So I think the economic consequences will be much more protected economies. Now, I would love to be proven wrong, don't get me wrong, I'm not looking forward to this. I would very much like it if we traded much more with each other, because I think the world is a better place when we're doing that. I'm quite conscious of how wrong things went in terms of the backlash I described to all of you, and that's why I think these economic consequences are not likely to be very good for us and for other countries for having this global phenomenon. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your views. I now request our chairman, Mr. Ramnathan Bhupati, our MD, Mr. C.J. George, and Sheikh Sultan Saud Al Qasmi to please come up to the podium. It is now time to thank all our esteemed dignitaries who by their presence have made this a memorable event. I request our chairman, Mr. Ramnathan Bhupati, to felicitate Dr. Shashi Tharoor. I now request our MD, Mr. C.J. George, to felicitate Sheikh Sultan Saud Al Qasmi. Thank you all.
I now request Mr. A. Balakrishnan, Executive Director, Geojit, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Respected Chairman, Honorable Chief Guest, Managing Director, and Sheikh Sultan, Board of Directors, warm greetings to you. Before I start my vote of thanks, let me apologize Gujarat Group. Sadish Menon forgot to mention, I do not know Gujarati, so I am welcoming you in my language, Swagatam. So, he will actually give you a special treat in the afternoon, and probably he will also increase target slightly high. Today it is a great day. We completed 35th year and we are celebrating the whole year with our customers. We had a very tough time last 2 years during the pandemic. Though we planned in 2020 there was an annual meet, but COVID-19 took away all plans, and also we were confined to work from home. And it is with a great pleasure we are meeting around 1,500 people together in a hall. So at the outset, let me thank Dr. Shashi Tharoor for spending his valuable time and addressing us and clearing our doubts on deglobalization. Sir, I read The World is Flat. I was a government employee in early 90s and left government because of globalization and opening of India and joined in private sector. I enjoyed. I do not know what will happen now. Probably the people like me got the maximum benefit out of the globalization. And this world is flat has become a pyramid now, wealth accumulated to few, and many of today it is a pyramid shape. That is actually outcome of globalization, and formally I do not know what will happen in the future. And thank you for your inspiring words. Thanks a lot. Dr. Sheikh Sultan is our chairman of Brazil Geojit Securities, and he is an inspiring leader. This is also 20th year for Brazil Geojit Securities. So last 2 decades, the Brazil also significantly contributed in our growth, and we are serving non-resident Indians through the branch network of UAE, and we also formed a similar joint venture in other GCC, an inspiring leader. Thank you for your presence and valuable words. And I thank our chairman for his leadership and guidance on our board meetings. Wonderful advice he used to give. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your presence. And let me also express my sincere thanks to all board members, Mr. Mahesh Vyas, Mr. R.K. Nair, Mr. M.P. Vijay Kumar. Thank you for your presence and in this wonderful occasion. Let me also express thanks to Mr. T.K. Jose, IAS, and Mr. Punnus George, and my colleagues in the leadership, state heads, regional managers, and all the managers present over here. Thank you very much for coming over here, attending this wonderful program. The rest of the day is actually yours. You can enjoy the entire afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Balakrishnan. With the national anthem, we will come to the end of the formal function. I request all of you to rise for the same.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Consistent performers are a valued asset for any company. The Performers Club was formed to recognize the hard work and dedication of our employees. The Platinum Club, the Gold Club, and the Silver Club members were selected based on their performance in the immediately preceding financial year. Today, we acknowledge these top performers.
Today, you might find the night sky less bright because some of the selected stars are amidst us as the Platinum Club members. Platinum Club symbolizes the outstanding productivity of our star performers. They will receive a memento and cash prize of 2 lakhs each. I now request our MD to come to the stage to decorate the awards to the Platinum Club members.
Kiran Kumar PE, dealer, Kerala South. Mr. Shinto CJ, dealer, Kerala North. Shinto has been with Geojit for 24 years. Mithun Manohar Pawar. Virat Kumar Acharya, dealer, Tamil Nadu North. Hindu Gopalan, business support, Kerala North. Mallikarjuna TR, dealer, Karnataka. Rahul AR, office assistant, Kerala South. Virendra Prakash Masri, dealer, Maharashtra. Virendra has 21 years of experience with Geojit. Jinsi AY, business support, Kerala North. Sandhya Mohan, business support, Kerala North. Sandhya has been with Geojit for over 15 years. Mahesh MM, office assistant, Kerala North. Singh Mary Joseph, business support, Kerala South. Singh has been with Geojit for 22 years. Suresh PS, business support, Kerala South. Ganesh Harudas Sanade, dealer, Maharashtra. Akhil George, sales, Kerala North. Anubharti R, business support, Tamil Nadu. Alvin John, sales, Kerala South. Hari Krishnan Via, sales, Kerala North. Rajesh P. Menon, dealer, Kerala North. He has been with us for 17 years. Praveen Manik Gavare, dealer, Maharashtra. Adarsh KP, dealer, Karnataka. Joyce Matthews, business support, Kerala South. Abhijit Ghosh, dealer, East India. Shiv Shankar B, branch head, Andhra Pradesh. Shailesh Kumar Jha, branch head, Central India.
we will grow to this size one day. Because we started this company in a typically garage converted office where we were practically 3 or 4 people. And I can say that a couple of them who joined us in the first 2 months are still with us. That's very gratifying. So at that time, when we started this firm, it was out of a genuine intention to help investors. I was in the market, I was in the broking industry, and I knew how broking industry was run. As I said in the corporate presentation, most of the brokers were basically traders. They also did broking for clients. So we decided right at the beginning that we will run a brokerage firm only for clients, only for investors. And we will not get into any proprietary business, any kind of stock market. So even today, 35 years after the foundation of the company, we follow the same principle. The company doesn't have any proprietary business, and I still do not invest in equities. Having said this, I wanted to basically take your attention to 35 years ago. In 1987, the stock exchange index started with around 600 points. Between 575 and 600. And I'm talking to you on what difference you made to the people. 600 rupees, if somebody had invested in the stock market, it would be 60,000 rupees today. That is roughly 100 times. So today morning I really had a look at what would now be if this money was kept in fixed deposit. It would have been 7,500 rupees. So if that 600 rupees was invested in FD in one of the best banks at 7.5% interest rate, it would have been 7,500. To that extent, in my view, all of you did a fabulous job. That is, you help a lot of customers create long-term money. And today, looking back, we have only 1.2 million customers. That means we could only help 1.2 million customers. We would have done much more. Imagine if we had 5 million, 50 lakh customers. 50 lakh customers would have created wealth like how the market was delivering wealth. So this is the difference you have made to the lives of the people. In between, I am not saying that some people would have become traders and would have lost money and got out of the market. I am not ruling out that possibility. It had happened. But that is because of the inherent nature of the market. Your responsibility was to advise the clients and the investors not to get into gambling, not to get into excessive speculation, because that will basically destroy the wealth. So if we had 5 million customers, then 5 million customers would have created this kind of wealth. So this is the major difference all of us made to the lives of people and the lives of families. So looking back at 35 years, the only disappointment is we did not expand the universe of customers from 1.2 million to 2 million or 3 million. But otherwise, when we look back what we did, I am very sure that all of us can be happy that we helped a lot of people to create long-term wealth. So this is what we have done for 35 years. If we actually expand further and grow further and acquire more customers, we will be still helping a lot of people. And that is the job that we are doing. We are also in the social service to that extent. We are helping families, we are helping people to create long-term wealth, and that is something we will relentlessly do. And today, last year was our best year in terms of financial performance. When we look back, we were also facing challenges from discount brokers. And this is an important challenge. I am not ruling out the possibility. But we need to always know one thing, that discount brokers discount the brokerage so that investors could trade more. And all of you know that one of the top discount brokers CEO once said 99% of their clients are losing money. So when you give discounts and deep discounts, there is an underlying tone of encouragement to encourage customers, investors to trade. And when they trade more, they get that so-called kick from trading, but they actually destroy their value. When we saw that, there were clients who left Geojit and went to discount brokers. I can also say that today, more number of customers we get from discount brokers. This is something we need to understand. We need to explain to our people, our customers also, that is, people are coming back. They did develop large number of investors or traders or capital market participants. I don't know what to call them. That number is huge today. When 99% of the people are losing money, it is something all of you know, that 99% of retail traders are actually losing. When they lose money, they will eventually come back to you for long-term wealth creation. So your market is today developed by probably discount brokers. You need to be happy about it. You have a market today. You have a market where people have made their trades. Go back to them. Explain to them the merit of long-term investing. And I give firm conviction that brokerage is not the important worry for an investor. Let us take this example. When Infosys came out with an IPO at 93 rupees, somebody had invested in 100 shares of Infosys. He would have invested 9,300 rupees. And that 9,300 rupees is 19 crore today. So on that 9,300 rupees, a full service broker would have charged, today's rate would charge say 50 rupees. And a discount broker would charge 20 rupees. So what difference it makes between 50 rupees and 20 rupees? But actually the difference is finally what is the value of that investment today. This is the example that we need to tell people. So we need people to invest in winning strategies, winning stocks, and that will only create wealth for them, and not this small saving in brokerage. It is very evident in seeing, customers from discount brokers coming to us and joining us. So we have seen this from data analysis. So you don't have to worry about it. We got a market developed by the newborn large discount brokers. They developed the market, and initial phases of their foundation, they took away some of our clients, including all the brokers' clients. But today the situation is different. The people who lost money started coming back. We have a positioning and we have a relevance in the universe of investors, and that relevance is we are today in 486, 485 locations in the country. We should be stepping in and helping families as a family self-management. And there is a significant role that we have to play. Don't worry about what is happening in the short term. Eventually, if you are able to build the portfolio for families and help them to create long-term wealth, they will continue to be our investors. We have investors from second generation now coming in doing business with us. The only reason is they have understood the company. Geojit is a company that cares only for customers. And as you saw in the corporate presentation in the morning, I want to repeat what I said in the corporate presentation. We just need to look after customers first. We don't have to do anything. I repeat the same sentence that I said. Don't look after Geojit's interest. You please look after our customers' interest. Our customers will look after our interest. And there is ample evidence of that past and it will continue to happen. So when we started distribution of mutual funds, insurance, distribution of bonds, etc., we were making baby steps to get into the business of wealth management for the families. So this is where you have a role. We should not encourage our customers to trade away their valuable wealth. We should advise them to invest intelligently and properly. And that is what is our responsibility. And if you continue to discharge that responsibility, you don't have to worry about it. In probably 5 years down the line, when we assemble for 40th anniversary, I'm sure we will be much larger. We will have a much larger universe of customers. The reason being only one, that is Geojit's purpose of existence is only to help our customers create long-term. Nothing else, let me tell you, it is not individual's capability, individual's smartness that is eventually helping a customer to create long-term wealth. It's basically discipline approach. Today when I stand in front of you, I fondly remember the long-time friend and guide of Geojit, Rakesh Chittimbala. I just did not conclude this speech without mentioning him. He has been probably one of the most successful traders in the whole world. I am not talking only about investment, I am talking about trading. But he has something special to it, that is trading. That is, he hates losses. So he book losses. He doesn't wait. In a profitable position, he is ready to wait for any number of years. For a loss-making position, he doesn't want to wait. So this is a discipline that he followed all throughout his trading life. And I have learned this from him. I have learned this watching him closely. Most of our retail traders, they do this mistake, they don't have discipline. They are basically driven by the emotions. The rules, the discipline that Rakesh Chittimbala followed, if people follow in the capital market, it will be pretty easy for those people to create long-term wealth. I am very sure Rakesh Chittimbala will continue to be a model for the whole of India's capital market and the capital, and on behalf of all of you, and as a humble participant of capital market, I basically express my deepest feelings for the department. So, remember, it was an unfortunate day today. We lost another colleague of ours from our Delhi office, Mr. Benjamin. I also remember him on this occasion. So with these words, I am basically trying to send you all to your values message that we have to reassemble from 40th year with much more vigor, with much larger universal customers. And once again, wish you all the very best, and all of you, I wish happy Independence Day. Thank you.
Thank you, George sir. As George sir always says, the best interest of our clients is one of our core values. We at Geojit continuously work towards building and nurturing a strong relationship with our clients. Today we have with us Mr. C.S. Venkateshwaran, who is among the first few clients of Geojit. He is a chartered accountant and has worked for reputed companies. I now request Mr. C.S. Venkateshwaran to share his experience as a Geojit client.
On this helpful nature. It was in 1987 that my father took retirement, and then he was a little bit interested in buying stocks, investing in stock market. So Mr. George suggested that why not take membership in Kochi Stock Exchange. And then that's a point of time, the exchange was expanding, adding new members. And then Mr. George helped him to get his CSC membership, and thank you so much for that. Of course, my father did not use it to make a big company or anything, basically use it for his own family investment purposes, that's it. I think I would like to, because I changed jobs and then went from Kochi to different parts of the country and all that, in Hyderabad and in Mumbai and all that. So everywhere I used to have opened the account of Geojit at those point of time. And I would like to share some of the experiences that I had really in my Mumbai time, where I lived for 15 years, year 2000 onwards. I initially opened an account with, I think, Prabhadekar Bank, I think, Shailab or Mooney, who is sitting around just after the same today. I remember this thing because I walked into the office and I said I want to open a Geojit. Because I previously had an account in Hyderabad, from where I changed company and came to Mumbai. So I went to the office of the account, showing us so very helpful. And then we shifted to Villaparle, and then Villaparle I had an account for quite a number of years. Why I'm saying this is that across a number of years, different managers, different team of people came in to service customers. What I find one thing which is uniquely standing out is that the true customer, they will make sure that you are delighted. You are delighted and make sure that your requirements are met. And this is something that's a big compliment to all of you. It's a big compliment to all of you. I think the culture which is created with top management, and the environment organization of so many people working across the country and out of country also, and following one principle to serve the customer, to delight the customer, is something which is purely a success story. And then if you feel that you are surprised in the amount of growth in 35 years, for me it's not a big surprise because I remember your character, which I see in 1984, is the same which is being followed by so many number of people. Serving the customers. And being Mumbai, of course, being financial capital, I worked with a number of large stockbroking companies that we change your account, marketing and all that. So at no point of time I find that there is a need for them. Because of course we have a flashy presentation saying that this is what it is and all that. But at the same time I think the trust which you carry is very, very important. See, sometimes you're not showing interest in the last penny or last rupee or something, but the trust which you carry. We know that our money is safe. We know the people who are running the show together. We know the principles using which the company is run, business is run. I think that makes enough and more confidence. Me and my family members, my father is all our family members, Geojit, Mr. George are also running for us. My mother even speaks. We are going to for Geojit program. So I think it's not about I'm just sharing as one customer among your 1.2 million customers. I am sure everybody will have the same experience. And I have a passion because 35 years I don't change a broker. I don't look at whether it feels more or less or whatever. What is important is the service and the trust. And moreover, the value system within which the business is run it shows that yes, your growth is long term. You're not here for a short term money making or something. You're not here for the short term. Because today we find a lot of promoters, a lot of companies going insolvent, going bankrupt. Not because business is bad, but because it's managed bad. In every business you are up and down. In short market, I don't say every day we make profits. We have seen in the long horizon 35 years, there are good days, bad days, good years, bad years. And there are sometimes we feel should I be in market, should I be out of market or whatever. But I think the long-term approach, Mr. George, I fully agree with you. The long-term approach, don't invest for short-term. Even if it is 1,000 investment, keep on investing, growing long-term. Unless you need money, you can cash it, but otherwise you can keep it, value multiplies. You can't imagine the example of 100 times the stock market is given. These are all real life examples. But many times people remain impatient because they are driven by emotions. A man or a woman is basically driven by emotions. And emotions is something which many people, many times they are able to manage. And including my own case, I felt that sometimes the sale is at wrong time, buy is a wrong time. I decided I will not buy any more of my own. Because I am not even though I would have not done the great numbers and understand numbers. But I think these are the government profession. I think Geojit was an excellent PM scheme. We have accounts in freedom, we have accounts in advantage, luxury, all family members are there. And I find that their management strategy, if you have given 3 lakhs and more, PMS is something which I really like. I have no tension. I can simply ask because periodically I think we have communications coming, webinars coming, updates coming, and then they keep updating what's happening in the market. I think you do an excellent job. I think that's what I think continue the excellent job. I am sure that the whole story is gratified. The next 45 more years you will see the audience, you will refer a bigger heart for your brands. Putting more people and then you will share the rest of the wealth of the capital market. So ultimately I would like to just sum up and say that me as a client of Geojit and personal friend of Mr. George, I am standing here and being privileged that I have this opportunity. And I continue. There is no question that when we look at the cost options and promises and order and changing, I think the trust which is created, I am fully satisfied. I think my only message to the team of people who are working in our organization is that the trust which you create, clients will come. I think the cost, because ultimately we are only sharing a profit, we are only sharing a small part of our profit. Ultimately we are losing what we are not losing. I think this is a message which I would like to just share and wish you all the best on your particular celebrations and then being Independence Day tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We look forward to a long and continued relationship with you. Now it's time to sit back, relax, and enjoy the colorful and entertaining programs that our friends and colleagues put out for us. I request Pravas Ravi to come over to the stage